What is going on, guys? Castillo right here, and today we're going to be talking about the famous A5 or A6 entry-level full-frame camera from Sony. It looks like we're around the corner to hear an announcement. We're going to tell you everything that we know coming right up. Welcome back to the channel, guys. Castillo right here, and if you're new to this place, I'm a photographer from Miami, Florida. I do gear reviews, tutorials, behind the scenes, and I've been covering a lot of rumors. So if you enjoy this type of content, consider subscribing to the channel and enable those notifications for more content like this one. So like I mentioned before, it seems like we are around the corner from a Sony announcement. Yet again, we're gonna hear about a brand new camera. Now, this time we're talking about an entry-level full-frame camera. We covered a video before with some of the preliminary rumors that we had at this time, but some things actually have changed about the new leaks about this camera. So let's start talking about all the features that this camera is potentially going to have. The very first thing that we know is that this announcement is going to happen around mid-September, and Sony is going to be introducing this camera. Now, we don't know exactly the name of the camera, but we are assuming that it's going to be called the A5 or the A6. Maybe Sony is going to name it something else, but this is going to happen pretty soon. Now, one of the features that we actually brainstormed in one of the videos that I posted before is that will this camera have articulating screen? And remember, this camera is said to be an entry-level sub-$1,000. So for a camera that is $1,000 to consider the camera having articulating screen, it's kind of like a premium feature. You know, the A7 III is the very first camera that has that property, but the rumor talks about that the A5 is going to have the same articulating screen from the Sony A7 III. Also, some of the rumors is talking about that the camera may also have the same touchscreen functionality. So I don't know how this is gonna sit with the other cameras, like the A6600, for example. A camera that is more than $1,000 doesn't have the same flip-out screen. It doesn't have touchscreen capabilities, but let's actually talk about that further down. Now, one of the things that we know is that Sony is gonna be catering this camera for vloggers. So yet again, they're gonna make another camera for vloggers. This one is gonna be a full frame, and I believe this is actually the very first full frame camera dedicated for vloggers. You know, a lot of cameras manufacturers have full frame cameras that vloggers have been using, but this one, we may see something similar as the ZV1. We may see a much more streamlined navigation. We may see also dedicated and much simplified button and dial layout. So, you know, we may have the product showcase button right there, dedicated movie record button as well. And we've seen something like this in the Sony A7 III. So now this camera is said to have an articulating screen and touchscreen capability. So this could actually be the top selling camera for, you know, the remaining of 2020 and 2021. So I'm pretty excited to see all the capabilities of this camera. Now, the other piece of information that kind of contradicts our prediction is the battery being utilized in this camera. And this camera is going to use the same battery as the Sony A7 III, which is the MPFZ100 battery, the big battery. So we were assuming that Sony is going to try to, you know, cut down the cost by putting the smaller battery, like for example, the one from the A6400. But the rumor talks about an MPFZ100 battery, so that's actually pretty good. We're also learning that this camera is going to have one single SD card slot, UHS 2, and we're also going to have USB port, which most likely you're going to be able to charge the camera while the camera is actually running. And we're going to have a microphone input and a headphone jack. Now, I'm thinking about all this feature that I just mentioned before and thinking back to the A6600, which is kind of like a vlogging-like camera, or, you know, an idea of vlogging camera is the camera that I use right now. It has, number one, flip up screen. You know, it's not the flip out. It doesn't have touchscreen capabilities, but it features the bigger battery, the MPFZ100 battery, the bigger grip. It also features microphone input and headphone jack. And, you know, it is a camera that is over $1,000. Now, Sony apparently is going to introduce this camera at about $1,000 being full frame. Now, having this capability, the touchscreen capability, having the flip out screen, and having a full frame camera for less than an APS-C camera, I don't know how this is gonna sit in the ecosystem. You know, one thing for sure is that, of course, you know, full frame glass is gonna cost you more expensive, and probably that's where Sony is going, you know, trying to kind of like the Gillette thing, you know, you buy the handle and then you have to buy the blades. But I don't know, drop your comments down below. Let me know what you think about these two cameras kind of like sitting one next to each other. Now, when it comes to connectivity, we are going to expect the latest Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Now, This is something that I wasn't so sure because, again, this is going to be an entry-level, very segmented camera that is going to be at $1,000. So one of the things that I thought that Sony can potentially do is remove the Bluetooth. Bluetooth is actually an expensive component to put in any camera, but it seems that Sony is not going to cut down any features from this camera. So I'm a little bit confused how this is going to affect, the other cameras, but, I'm sure that Sony has to figure it out. Now, when it comes to body, we should expect a similar body from the A6000 line, and it kind of makes sense because those body cost Sony less money to manufacture. They also paid the tooling many years ago, and I'm assuming that they're going to reutilize some of the bodies from, the other models that they already have. Probably they're going to have to make some modifications to allocate, all the internals and a much larger sensor. But I think when it comes to real estate, because of the mount, remember the APS-C mount and full frame mount is exactly the same thing. So if they can put that mount on an A6000, chances are that they can fit a full frame sensor. So I have confidence that, this is pretty much what we're going to see in the A5. So something that I didn't mention before when I was talking about the battery, that because we use the MPF-Z100 battery, this is going to leave for the camera to have a deeper grip, kind of like the A6600. So this is going to be a very much welcome feature. And once again, this camera is sounding like a very powerful entry-level camera. Now, the followings are not so confirmed features, but they come from Sony Alpha rumors, and it talks about this camera having a burst capability of 5 frames per second. Once again, not a lot of people are going to get this camera for photography or sport photography, and like we mentioned before, this camera is going to be catered to vloggers. So the other thing that we know is that this camera is going to have IBIS. Now, when talking about IBIS, we know the IBIS from Sony is not the best one out there. Apparently, the one on the A7 III is a much more enhanced version of the current IBIS that they have full frame, but the A7 III has a turbo IBIS, the A7R4 has a turbo IBIS, and the A6600 also has a pretty bad IBIS, to the point that having IBIS and not having IBIS, it's kind of like the same. So hopefully Sony is going to reevaluate the formula and give us a much more stable IBIS, because if this camera is going to be full frame and this camera is going to be catered for vloggers are going to walk while they're talking. So I'm hoping that Sony really improves the IBIS once and for all. The Canon EOS R5 has, a very good IBIS, and this is the very first time that Canon attempts IBIS in any of their bodies. So Sony hopefully has something coming up, and probably we're gonna see in this camera. Now, the next rumor talks about this camera not having a pop-up flash, and this is something that we assume, a camera dedicated for vloggers, don't need a pop-up flash. Now, however, this camera may have a pop-up EVF, kind of like the one from the RX100 Mark 7, for example. Now, I don't know about this one, because this one being a vlogging camera, and being $1,000 only, I'm assuming that Sony would want to actually save in that feature, because EVFs are not something that vloggers use, all the time. Most likely they're gonna just look at the screen and that's gonna be it. So I don't know about that one. All right, let's talk about video specs, because this camera is going to have some pretty sweet specs, guys. So from this rumor, we learned that this camera is going to have 4K video up to 30p, and check this out, 10-bit internal at 100 Mbps. Now, this so far is actually better than any other Sony camera out there, other than the Sony A7 III, which hasn't been delivered yet to people, but, well, to some people. But, for $1,000, 10-bit capabilities in camera is going to be outstanding. So there's still a lot of unanswered questions, and one of them is like, what kind of sensor are we gonna have in this camera? And chances are is that we're not gonna see a 24 megapixel sensor like the one on the A7 III. We may see something a lot less, maybe 20 megapixel, maybe 16 megapixel. One thing for sure is that I think Sony is gonna wanna keep the higher megapixel difference for the much more expensive cameras, because remember, this camera is gonna cost $1,000. Probably when the A7 IV comes in, it's gonna be at around $2,200, unless they wanna keep it at $2,000 and lower the price of the A7 III. Chances are that we're gonna have also a faster processor than the one on the A7 III. Remember, this one is gonna be processing 10-bit internally, so I don't think that an older processor is capable of actually doing that. But anyway, so very promising technologies right here. This also gives us a path where Sony is actually thinking ahead in upcoming cameras like the A7 IV, A7R5, and anything else that they're gonna be coming moving forward. So apparently they're not gonna cripple the camera by removing a lot of the features. As you can see, we're gonna have pretty powerful features, and features that we don't have in the much more expensive cameras that can cost even like 4 times the price of this camera at $1,000, like for example 10-bit internal. Now, Let's wait and see, guys, but this is a very exciting moment to be an alpha shooter. So let me know what you think about this leak. Drop your comments down below. And as always, guys, if you enjoyed this video, subscribe to this channel for more content like this one. Also hit the like button. Don't forget to enable notifications. I'll see you in the next one.